when I was in college, I was part of the production of this play. And in that experience, I met a young lady who was also a part of the play. And she, I discovered, was dating this guy. And it didn't seem like a great relationship. When she would talk about it, it seemed like she knew on some level that it was not a great relationship. So one day in the course of a conversation, I asked her, well, what's the point of dating at all? And so she thought about that, and we went kind of back and forth, and she came to the realization, oh, yeah, the point of dating is to discern marriage. That's what dating is for. So then I asked her, well, the guy you're dating now, would you ever marry him? She said, never. And I said, well, if the point of dating is to discern whether you should marry somebody, and the guy you're currently dating, you would never imagine yourself marrying, why are you dating him? And then she goes, you're my Dr. Phil. That'll be $90. So often in life we can forget the end, or what's the thing we're preparing for. When I taught high school, anyone who does curriculum will tell you always start with the end in sight. It's called reverse engineering. You decide what do you want the student to know at the end of the course, and then you reverse engineer the course so that when the student gets to the end, they've prepared for what you want them to be prepared for. I can't tell you how many parents have asked this question. If you had to sum up in 2 or 3 words what qualities or virtues or habits you would want your kids to have, that when your kids are 20 and they said, oh, you have amazing children, they're so, and they can only use 3 words to describe your kids, what would those 3 words be? And it's kind of interesting to see them think about that and like, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe faithful and responsible and kind. I think those would be the 3 things, And then one thing to ask them is that how somebody would describe you? Because if you want to give that to somebody else, do you yourself have those qualities? Or I think as a pastor, I want to hire people who are spirit-filled and have a hunger for excellence and are humble and, but if I'm not that way, then the law of attraction says I won't draw those types of employees to work here. But in all these situations, there's an end in sight, and the question is are we preparing for that end? And to that, we have these scriptures today that Jesus speaks to us about our ultimate end when he comes again in his glory. Now, I should before that say, the lectionary is such a great gift that we have as Catholics. The lectionary is the church choosing for us what readings we'll hear. So over a 3-year cycle at Mass, you hear the great majority of the Bible. If you go to daily Mass every day for 2 years, you hear basically the whole Bible over those 2 years. So that's the lectionary, the church giving us these readings. And the reason why the lectionary is a gift is because sometimes Jesus says weird or strange things. And the preacher doesn't want to preach on them. And so if we didn't have a lectionary, I would just skip them. I'd be like, let's hear another one about, the vine and the branches, right? Because today in the gospel, Jesus says strange things, confusing things, dark things. And something that we have to understand is that Jesus is taking a biblical imagery, he's taking biblical events and salvation history, and he's stacking them on top of each other. So in one way, he's talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which he prophesies and happens in 70 AD. The Romans come in and they destroy the temple in Jerusalem. In some ways, he's talking about his death and resurrection, which he also referred to as the temple of his body, which then ushered in the final age, the age of salvation. And in some ways, he's talking about his final coming again in glory, when he returns in all of his glory and he reveals every human heart. And so he's going back and forth through these 3 images. There's a biblical scholar named Dr. Mary Healy, and she says it's almost like telescopic. Like a telescope has like a little lens that goes into a larger lens, and that's classic biblical typology. The Bible does that over and over again, where God will do something in the Old Testament, and then that's kind of the lens by which you look at something in the New Testament, where it's kind of fulfilled. So that's why these scriptures, these images seem kind of strange, because Jesus is stacking all those things on top of each other. He says this, "In those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken." What's he talking about? Well, in some ways, he's talking about the temple in Jerusalem. Jews believed that the temple in Jerusalem was a microcosm of the whole universe. There were tapestries that hung in the temple that had stars and constellations on them. They also believed the menorah, the 7-pronged candle, symbolized the sun and the moon and the 5 known planets at the time. So they thought the temple itself was a microcosm of the universe. And so when the temple is destroyed, it's like the universe is toppling over. But that doesn't also mean that at the end of time, cosmic things might not also happen. And then Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And that comes from an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Daniel. It was our first reading, where it talks about one like a son of man who is presented before God, is given dominion, power, and glory. And when Jesus' temple, the temple of his body, is killed on the cross, then he rises to new life, he ushers in the final age of salvation. And he's getting back all those things, power, glory, dominion, and honor. So all of these images are at play in the gospel. But those three things, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the death and resurrection of Jesus, and his final coming out in glory, all of them speak of distress, and they speak of crisis. And the interesting thing about a crisis is that a crisis does not create character, it reveals it. That's what a crisis does. And if you're not prepared for a crisis, when it comes, it's too late. Are we preparing now for what our faith may cost us? Jesus is going to come again in all of his glory. It's going to reveal every human heart. But even as we follow Jesus in this life, sometimes following him costs us something. It can cost a lot. And now's the time to prepare for that. You know, the Greek philosopher Aristotle said that you are what you repeatedly choose. The colloquial way you'd say that is men form habits, and then habits form men. That's how virtue works. That's how habit works. We either become virtuous, we participate with God's grace and we become better, or we become vicious. We reject God's grace and we take on more bad habits or vice. And so Aristotle says that in the course of someone's life, they might come to a decision where they have to tell the truth. And it's a crisis. But if they tell the truth, it will cost them dearly personally. But here's the question, Aristotle would say, is leading up to that point in their life, have they habituated themselves through repeated good action to be a truth-telling person? Because if I tell the truth all the time, then when this big crisis comes, in some ways, Aristotle says, the decision has already been made. Because I've already formed my character to be somebody who tells the truth. So even when it becomes difficult, I still do it. You see how a crisis doesn't create character, it reveals it. And when it comes to our faith, if a crisis comes in our faith, in other words, if standing up for Jesus costs us something, or a lot, or everything, the time to prepare for that is now. Let me tell you a story of my own life. When I was in college, I worked at Fashion Square Mall. I worked at Sears and Roebuck. I sold hardware. It closed down, hopefully not because of me, but anyway. And while I worked there, I got to know this other guy. He had just moved in from Atlanta. He seemed like an awesome guy. He was really into basketball. He played junior college, and I thought Atlanta culture was really interesting. So anyway, I get to know him. We've known each other for a couple weeks, and then it becomes lunch break, and so we're going to go eat lunch together. So we're walking to the food court in Fashion Square Mall, and the entire time we're walking, there's a question that's kind of haunting me as I'm walking. And do you know what that question was? Am I going to pray before I eat? Am I going to make the sign of the cross before I eat? So we get to the food court. Now, I could have chickened out. I'd be like, oh, I got to tie my shoe, and then prayed under the table, and then just like pop back, like, oh, I love Panda Express, whatever it is. Or I could, but I was like, but should I do that, Jesus says in the gospel, those who are ashamed of me before others, I'll be ashamed before the Father. Ugh. So anyway, this question is haunting me. What am I going to do? I get my Panda Express. I get my orange chicken. We sit down. I'm looking at him. And I'm like, you know what? I'm probably overreacting. I'm just going to pray. And I can't remember whether I told him, I'm going to pray now, or whether I just did it. But I remember closing my eyes, made the sign of the cross. I prayed. It took like 20 seconds. Finished my prayer, make the sign of the cross. I opened my eyes, and he has pushed himself away from the table, and he's like this. And he said, bro, I'm religious too, but I don't know what all this was about, right? And it was super awkward. And, that day I had to make a decision. And I could have decided, yeah, I want to be Catholic, but I don't want people to know it. Or I don't want people that are just getting to know me, I don't want to come across as too Catholic, And it was so awkward and slightly painful that there could be a temptation the next time I eat in public or I'm somebody I don't know that well, maybe I just won't do it. Maybe I just won't go there. But friends, there comes a time in our lives where it might cost us a lot or everything to follow the Lord. And when he comes again in all of his glory, he's going to reveal hearts. And when a crisis comes, it's not going to create character, it's going to reveal it. And here's the thing, if I'm not willing to make the sign of the cross in a country that has religious freedoms in the center of Fashion Square Mall before I eat orange chicken, then when I would be in a crisis where I could really suffer for the name of Jesus, I'm not going to do it. Because I've habituated myself to not take the path of the cross. I've done what's easy, The way we prepare for a crisis in the future, which will not create culture but simply reveal it, is we build our faith now, today. The Bible says, if today you hear the voice of the Lord, harden not your heart. And there's a demon in your life, and there's a demon in my life, and that demon's name is later. Later. Yeah, I'm a husband and a father, and I do these things, and I know I would love my wife better, and I would be a better man to my children if I got this out of my life or if I prayed more, and I'm going to do that later. I could be a better mom and a better wife. I know I really struggle with this, and I should work on it, but I don't know, it's not that big of a deal. It's not a mortal sin. It's probably just a venial sin, so I'll work on that later. Yeah, I could be a better priest. I could serve my people in a better way, and I could sacrifice more in these ways, and I'm going to do that later. Follow Joachim, do that. And we just go on and on. I'm a young person, and I think I'm called to marriage, but I'm in no way prepared to get married, and I know that. And I'm not doing the things I need to be doing to be a man worthy of marriage, to be a husband and a father. I'm going to get to that later. But then when the crisis comes, we're not ready. Because it's not going to create character. It's just going to reveal it. Friends, when I preach to you, I always want to preach the gospel, which is good news. And I look at these scriptures sometimes, what Jesus says to us, that can be dark or confusing or very convicting. But what Jesus is telling us is, this is going to come for all of us. When we die, we meet the Lord. Or we're going to be alive when he comes again in all of his glory, and he's going to reveal every human heart. It's going to be a crisis moment. And we want to be the kind of people who prepare today, who prepare now. So when that crisis comes, it reveals our character, and our hearts say to the Lord, I belong totally to you.